today's history video, I'd like to talk about the Ulysses S. Grant administration. He was elected president, the first election since Lincoln was reelected, and after Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's vice president, left office. He was elected in 1868 and served till 1876. Grant was personally incredibly honest, which is unusual for a president whose administration was drowned in scandals. In fact, after he left the White House, Grant went into business with a guy named Fernando Wood, and he was a total thief. He ripped Grant off, left with all of Grant's money, all of the gifts he'd received from around the world for winning the Civil War, and Grant was destitute. And Cornelius Vanderbilt gave Grant $150,000 to live on for the rest of his life, which was more than enough money to do that in that time. Grant insisted on repaying every penny to Vanderbilt, even though he didn't have to, and did it by writing his memoirs as he was dying of throat cancer to make sure Vanderbilt got paid and make sure his wife Julia had enough to live on for the rest of her life. Brilliant memoirs, an act of selflessness. His administration, per se, was an excellent one in terms of its accomplishments. The main achievement was that he really battled to preserve the rights of black people in the South. He enforced the civil rights laws. He used federal troops to try to suppress the Ku Klux Klan, to stop the reign of terror that had gripped the South, to disenfranchise blacks of their rights. He fought hard against lynching of black people. He was the only president ever to be really fair to Native Americans in the West, and really set the stage for the Industrial Revolution in the United States. But what's attracted the most attention about Grant are the scandals. And for a while I thought that this attention to scandal was part of sort of the Southern rewrite of American history that came after the Civil War. We'll talk about that in another video. But really, the scandals were horrific. It began with a scandal in 1869, the first year in the White House, by Jay Gould and his partner Fisk, to corner the entire gold market in the world. And as part of it, they persuaded Grant not to sell gold from the Treasury, said it would be good for the farmers not to do that. And there is some evidence that they gave Grant's wife a $25,000 personal bribe. There is no evidence that Grant knew anything about any of this stuff. And when Grant found out that the price of gold had been bid up from about 130 an ounce to almost 170 an ounce, as a result of Gould's and Fisk's manipulation, he ordered gold sold from the Treasury. The problem was this wasn't just a small scandal. Everybody invested in gold on the way up. And when it crashed, when Grant released the gold, he threw the United States into a recession, and it didn't recover for another year or two. And there was scandal after scandal. At one point, Grant appointees didn't collect the whiskey tax and pocketed it instead, $2 million. They sold routes for delivery of the mail. The Customs House in New York was a place of routine bribery. There were 8 or 9 major scandals, many of them involving Babcock, who was Grant's trusted secretary, a former general, who ended up as a total thief and orchestrated much of this corruption. I ought to note that in the Gould and Fisk scandal, Basil Rathbone, who was Julia Grant's brother, profited in the scandal and was heavily implicated. But apart from that, apart from this deluge of scandal stuff, Grant really was the last president to take civil rights seriously. And because of these scandals, a movement developed for civil service reform. Lincoln had grown the federal government to enormous proportions to fight the war, and we just had no way of administering it. Every single job in the federal government was named by the president or by a cabinet secretary. Grant had 40 relatives somewhere on the federal payroll. This was replaced increasingly by the civil service system, and Grant was the first president to pass a civil service law. But on balance, you have to say he was not a very good president, having been a fantastic general. Thanks for watching.